So today we're going to be talking about step by step how I set exposure when I'm making these videos, and this is actually an answer to someone who's very active down in the comment section, and his channel name is isitebuild. Can I also get the filter for a 06 Chrysler Town & Country? The 3.3 liter engine. Well, I was going to change my oil while I was talking about it, but I think it's gonna rain. I'm not gonna be able to change my oil. You know what's kind of funny is that Cody Scott actually just called me like 2 hours ago and was like, hey man, what do you think about doing like sit down interview type more style of videos, because he wants to do a series of videos with me on more of the mindset and thought and theory behind filmmaking and choosing lenses and cameras and things like that. Away. That's the problem with having a ceiling fan where you make your videos. You sometimes get the blades. So how I expose my videos and show the step-by-step process that I do, and I think I've talked about this in other videos, but I wanted to make a dedicated video, something that I've gotten a lot of questions about actually since I've been doing these videos, and I've realized that most of the people that I'm talking to are actually coming from like smartphone cameras, and so some people don't actually know how to change the settings and what the settings do to your films. And isitebuild asks me often about what settings I was using specifically in the video, and so I wanted to go through when I am trying to expose a video, what I do. And now step one has nothing to do with the settings that I change. It actually has to do with an overlay display that I always look at, and that is the histogram. Now I'll quick show you on the screen, going into the menu, finding what it is, and then activating it. I know a lot of people, me including, would remove the histogram off of their screen because they just don't like some big obnoxious thing taking up their screen. But if you are trying to check exposure, that is the best way that you have on this camera without a monitor. What it does show you is that the side all the way to the left is your shadows, and the side all the way to your right is your highlights. So anything touching either of those ends is gone. You have no information. If it's touching the left, you have no information in the darkest of your shadows. If it's touching the right, you don't have any information in the brightest of your brights. And whenever I'm exposing, I look to see if I'm blowing out my highlights or my shadows. And after you have your histogram set up, I'd always leave that on. And the first exposure value that I would set is your shutter speed. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, I always try and keep it at 1/50th of a second. And when I'm shooting at 60, I like to keep it at 1/125th of a second. The higher your shutter speed goes, you're going to have less light. So you're going to have significantly less light with a shutter speed of 1/250th as you would with a shutter speed of 1/50th. The next step that I do is I set my ISO. Now, if I can, I try and keep my ISO at 200 because that's sort of the best ISO for keeping your highlights. It at least supposedly saves the most information in your highlights, and so that is what I always try and shoot at. Now in this scenario, I actually can't shoot at ISO 200, and I'm shooting at ISO 125. And the last one that I set is my aperture. Now normally, because I am using a variable ND filter, I leave my aperture at f3.5. I almost never change it. And then of course I just spin the ND filter to get my exposure right. If you do not have an ND filter yet or aren't planning on getting one, the aperture is where I would change my exposure. And really, there is no magic number for this. You have to raise it or lower it according to your scenario, because your scenario is constantly going to be changing. You're not able to keep the same settings from a shady area that you have in bright sunlight. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind that throughout a single shoot, you might have to change your exposure value a dozen times. But if you want to shoot with a shallow depth of field outside in broad daylight, you are going to have to get an ND filter, and you are going to have to keep your aperture wider open, or else you will get no shallow depth of field. Look at your screen and get pretty much the look you want, but then check it with your histogram at the end to make sure that you're not clipping any of your highlights or clipping any of your shadows. And that's pretty much what I do. It's not complicated, but that is my step-to-step process of what I do every time I pick up this camera and I'm setting it up to film. If you found this video helpful, I know it was very basic, but there's a lot of people who are new to filmmaking who are getting this camera, and I really hope that these concepts I'm sharing are helping you. Thank you, Herman, for those questions. Guys, go check out his channel. He does a lot of I think one of his popular videos is how to monetize YouTube without 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch time hours, so check him out. He has really good information over there. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. You know what's actually interesting? I actually used a mic that I've actually never used in any of these vlogs, and that's the SMX10. This was my first ever mic that I got, and right now I have no idea how it sounds because I've never, ever used it in a studio setup.